Final installment of our week-long focus on the South Asian subcontinent. Remember, during our first episode on Monday, we looked at the most recent clashes between India and Pakistan in Kashmir. I had the Pakistani ambassador as my guest, and I promised to bring you the Indian perspective late in the week. Well, today we'll do that. Since Monday, the situation has moved on following the shelling between Pakistan and India, which killed 7 civilians on both sides. The Indian government is reported to have been briefing leaders of opposition parties on issues including the Kashmir situation. This has been an extraordinary move, as most decisions by the Modi government are taken without keeping the opposition in the loop. Why is the government doing it this time? To get more insight, I'm pleased to be joined from New Delhi by Professor Tridivesh Singh Maini, foreign policy analyst at the O.P. Jindal Global University. Professor Singh, thank you very much for joining us. First of all, it's been 5 days since the deadly shelling and tensions are still high. What's behind this latest skirmish?
I think this is, you know, if you look at it, both sides, the Pakistani side says that, you know, they've come up with a figure of this year itself 500, 600 shellings. Similarly, if you look at the Indian side, we also have our own figures. But you know, the larger issue is that this is part in India. We look at it as a sudden, you know, Pakistan since 2014 has been more aggressive on raising the Kashmir issue at international platforms, and at the same time, you know, aggression across the LOC is one thing, but we are having, since last year there have been a number of terror attacks. You had a terror attack first in Uri last year. We had a terror attack in Amarnath where pilgrims were killed 3-4 days ago. You had yesterday again 2 of our military personnel were killed. So the fact is that Pakistan can come up with its figures. India will come up with its own figures. It'll be an endless thing.
But
at the end of the day, what is happening is that for domestic.
Now, the ambassador of Pakistan to China, as you said, Masood Khalid, told me on Monday that there had been 554 ceasefire violations from the Indian side in 2017 alone, and India's provocations along the border and armament upgrade is not conducive at all in maintaining peace and stability in the region. How do you respond to the ambassador's comments?
I think the first thing is, obviously there needs to be, in fact the ceasefire, the initial ceasefire was initiated by India in 2003 by the then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And obviously India is very much interested in the ceasefire. There has been talk about the DGMOs reaching out to each other. But the fact is that, you know, it is cherry picking. You know, you can't just cherry pick and say that in the last 4 days India has been doing it. The fact is neither of us is there on the ground. We don't know it. But all I can tell you is that in the last, this is a larger, you know, issue, and Pakistan generally has been more aggressive on the Kashmir issue in the last 3 years, and a number of terror attacks has gone up. And obviously, I mean, if they start off, the policy has changed to a degree that, you know, there is full retaliation from the Indian side. But that doesn't mean that we don't want restoration of some basic.
Why would the Pakistani side want to be more aggressive all of a sudden?
I think what has happened in the last 2 to 3 years, you see the domestic, if you look at the domestic, you know, a lot is said about the domestic politics of India, but if you look at the domestic politics of Pakistan, the civilian government finds itself embroiled in a number of problems, and this is a good, to become more belligerent on Kashmir is a good way, you know, of distracting people from that. And the army generally has become more assertive. You know, in Pakistan, it was expected that with the civilian government coming in 2013, things would change. But the civilian government lost control within a year, year and a half. And I think this is part of a larger, as I said, policy of, you know, being more aggressive on Kashmir. Now, this also includes a
Okay, at the same time, I'm sorry,
Yes.
I keep interrupting you, but at the same time, India is upgrading its military forces with purchases from the US, Russia and Israel. For instance, during Prime Minister Modi's visit to the US last month, the Trump administration approved a $2 billion sale of surveillance drones to India. I mean, you were talking about Pakistan being more aggressive, but India's stepping up its weaponry. Is that also contributing to the situation, to the balance of power in the region?
Well, let's look at it separately. You know, you asked me first the question about ceasefire violations. That is separate. But the issue is that, you know, if India finds that, you know, Pakistan is being used, or attempts are being made to use Pakistan to contain it, and attempts are being made by other external powers to encircle India within South Asia, it needs to look at alternatives, definitely. And I don't think, if just as China has good relations with many of India's neighbors in South Asia, if India develops strong defense ties with the US and Israel, it doesn't mean that it's targeted either at Pakistan or at China, but yes, you have to be ready. If India does certain things in its own self-defense, I don't think that anybody can object to it. I don't think any of these alliances are targeted at China. And let's also understand that the India-China relationship is a manifold relationship. It is an extremely important one. And I think the leaderships, I hope they understand that. There have been very positive signals from the meetings on the sidelines last week at the G20. So I think these two, we are in an era where you can have multipolar relationships, and you need to dehyphenate, you know, defense relationships and economic relationships.
Yes, but at the same time, you were also talking about certain powers trying to encircle India in South Asia. I think it is very clear who you're talking about. It is true that in the government there is the will to maintain good relationship. However, some media in India seem to hold very negative views about China, even suggesting that China is behind the skirmish between Pakistan and India. Is this view widespread?
No, I think if you go through, I don't think Chinese media ends at one newspaper and Indian media ends at one newspaper. I think if you go through, there have been some very nuanced pieces by people who have been part of the foreign service. Some eminent diplomats have written pieces recently. Naturally, between two countries, between India and China, there are bound to be differences. But at the same time, and obviously we understand the China-Pakistan nexus also, and we cannot deny that. There's no denying that. But it doesn't mean that, you know, there are no shades of grey. And secondly, if you look at the Chinese media as well, you know, I was reading today that they have been, you know, there is talk about the 1962 war and trying to evoke images of the past. Now, it's up to us. I think it's up to the the leadership and, you know, the sort of intellectuals, intelligentsia on both sides to make a choice whether they want to think of 1962 or whether they want to think of 2022. I think, you know, the recent skirmishes between India and China as well were a bit of a setback to the relationship. But I think, as I said earlier, there are too many stakes involved, and I think things will get back on track. Now, as far as the region is concerned,
we do hope so. And we have to leave it there. Unfortunately, time is up. But many thanks to Professor Tridivesh Singh Maini, Foreign Policy Analyst at the OP Jindal Global University, joining us from India.